Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Miller, and I would like to welcome you to Society of Government Economists. I'm the president of Society of Government Economists, and today we have an exciting seminar on the evolving geography of the auto industry in North America in light of growing electrification. We have two esteemed panelists today. Our schedule of today's seminar will be, I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about SGE and some upcoming events. Then we'll introduce the speakers, and the speakers will talk, and then we will open up for questions and answers in the chat from the chat questions at the end of the seminar. So for more information about Society of Government Economists and how to join, please visit our website at sge-econ.org. You can also follow us on Blue Sky at sgeecon.bsky.social and Facebook to learn about our SGE events. SGE's mission is to support the professional development of government economists and economists interested in the economics of public policy. To do this, we offer several different activities, such as our virtual seminars like this one. We also offer sessions at conferences that we sponsor, and we also host an annual conference. We offer leadership opportunities and networking and mentoring events throughout the year. So first, our next virtual seminar will be on the effects of mental health on financial decision-making and implications for policy. Our speaker will be Vicki Bogan from Duke University, and the seminar will be on Wednesday, March 19th at noon. We also offer 7 SGE-sponsored sessions at the 2026 Allied Social Science Association annual meeting that will be held January 3rd through 5th, 2026 in Philadelphia. Our call for papers for our SGE-sponsored sessions will be coming soon. Please check our website or join our mailing list or join SGE to be on our mailing list to get more information. SGE is now accepting nominations of active SGE members for board of director positions. The deadline for nominations is March 3rd. The details on the nominations can be found on our website. If you go to sge-econ.org and you look for a drop-down menu that says about/contact SGE, and you should find the nominations link there. Please join us this Friday, February 21st at 6 p.m. on Zoom for a virtual happy hour with the board. It's BYOB, and come and mingle. Registration is required. The link to register for this event will be on our website later tonight, so stay tuned. And finally, please join us for 2 evenings of virtual mentoring. All are welcome. The details are coming soon. I just wanted to put out that plug for that event. Now I will turn it over to Mel to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Christina. Thomas Klier is a senior economist and economic advisor in the Economic Research Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Klier's research focuses on the effects of changes in manufacturing technology, the spatial distribution of economic activity, and regional economic development. Since joining the Chicago Fed in 1992, Mr. Klier has written widely on the evolving geography of the auto industry. His current research includes the changing structure of the auto industry in response to the increasing electrification of transportation. Dr. Klier received an MBA from Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Nuremberg, Germany, an MA from Wayne State University, and a PhD in economics from Michigan State University. I'm pleased to introduce Thomas Klier.
All right, thank you, Mel. Thank you, Christina and Sabrina. Thanks for hosting this event, and thanks for inviting us. So the main feature here of today's seminar is a presentation by my long-term colleague and co-author Jim Rubenstein, who's at Miami, Ohio, and myself. I'm at the Chicago Fed, as Mel said. So before we get started, I want to just do a few housekeeping things. The first one is the disclaimer. What we're about to talk about is only our own opinion and does not represent anybody else's, certainly not anybody else's opinion at either the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago or anywhere else in the Federal Reserve System. So then how are we going to spend the next, 45, 60 minutes with you all? So Christina already told you the topic. It's about what do we know about the changing footprint of the auto industry in North America in light of the transformational change the industry has been undergoing for some time. There are three parts to this presentation. So Jim and I are going to tag team, and I get to open and I get to close, and he gets to go in the middle. And that's just because we're just about covering equal lengths of the presentation. So let me, and thank you for all for being here, and hoping that this is of interest to you all. So share. You can submit your questions in the chat, or there's time for Q&A at the end as well. And we'll stick around for that. So let's see, slideshow. Okay, there we go. I'm beginning there. All right, here we go. So that's the cover slide, and I am good to go. So the question really is, what's going on to the footprint of where vehicles and so the key parts are being made, as everything in this industry that we sort of have been familiar with seems to be changing. And the two big drivers that we're looking at today, so we have two things going on at the same time. Vehicles with engines, the production of those types of vehicles is declining, has been declining for some time. And the flip side is true as well. Vehicles with batteries, the production of those types of vehicles has been growing. All right. So that's where the industry is going. And with a sharp focus on geography, we're trying to parse out how much of the footprint of the industry is changing because of those underlying transformational changes. So our presentation falls into three parts. I'm going to spend a few minutes just bringing everybody up to speed, how to think about the footprint of this industry. So we'll sort of establish the baseline. We'll talk about light vehicles. This is a technical term. Some of you may not have heard this. Essentially, that refers to the kind of vehicles that we as consumers would be able to buy. It excludes it excludes medium and heavy duty trucks. It includes anything from a car, small car, any size car, to a crossover, sport utility vehicle, full-size pickup truck. That's all in there. So the industry refers to that as light vehicles. So that's the opener. What does it look like in the industry today? And then Jim gets to talk about recent changes as far as the ICE element of the industry is concerned. And the ICE here means internal combustion engine, not anything else. And how has the industry responded to declining volumes in that space? And then I'll come back to conclude. And then we're going to look out into the future from today with utilizing some forecast data. What can we infer from that forecast about what's happening in the medium term? That's how far the forecast runs. As those electric car production ramps up, how is this expected to impact the footprint of the industry in North America? All right, now you've seen the plan. Okay, then let me get started. What we are going to present is based on data. The data comes from a vendor. It's S&P Global Mobility. We've worked with the data for many years. It's one of the highly respected purveyors of data pertinent to this industry. And the data we get from them is actually rather detailed. So we pull production data, and it allows us to see at a rather high level of disaggregation what goes on in the industry. We pull the data for all of North America, and initially, we have data for 2016 and 2023, and then we also have forecast at the time that was going out to 2029. The data allows us to actually parse out which particular vehicle models are produced at every vehicle assembly plant, and it also tells us where the accompanying, what's called the powertrain, and we focus within the powertrain, we focus on the engine or the battery, where the engine is coming from that goes to the vehicle that's made in a specific assembly plant. So it's really detailed and it's comprehensive. And with that data, that's the foundation of what we're about to show you. All right. So let's jump right in. First section. I want to set the baseline. I want to talk. I'll show you a bunch of maps. And the point is to sort of literally illustrate the footprint of this industry. And we're focusing on two types of plants: the plants that make the finished vehicle, the vehicle assembly plants, and the plants that build the engines. All right, let's jump right in. 2023, which is the last full year for which we have data. Any day now, the 2024 data will come in. So it does look a little stale, but that's the reason we didn't use 2024 data. 15.6 million light vehicles were produced in North America, about 2/3 of them in the United States, Mexico, just over 20, and then around 10% in Canada. So you put these 15.6 million units on a map, and it looks like this. So there's North America, and there's a bunch of black circles. All these circles are centered on the map based on where light vehicle assembly plants are located. The scale of these circles is proportional to the volume. So the largest circle captures 500,000 units, which is pretty large for a light vehicle assembly plant. And then what else is going on? So what do we, and it represents 2023 data, vehicle production, only all of North America, okay? And we see that there's a lot of white space on this map, meaning the industry is highly concentrated in space. That's a feature. It's been this case in automobile production for many, many years, and it's something you can observe in other regions of the world as well. Vehicle is a classic weight-gaining good. It is comprised of many, many thousands of parts. And when it's all finished, you want to produce the vehicle so you don't have to ship it over large distances to your consumer. The north-south axis that starts in southwestern Ontario and extends all the way to the Gulf, we refer to as Auto Alley. So these states are highlighted in gray, and that represents just about 3/4 of light vehicle production in North America. There are some plants that don't fall into that region, but they're not far. They're tethered pretty closely. The major outlier is the Tesla plant in Fremont in the Bay Area. We'll talk about that later. And then there's a cluster that's been growing over the last 2.5 decades in Mexico, and it's centered around Mexico City, sort of around the population centroid of our neighbor to the south. So that's what it looks like today, a highly agglomerated industry as far as production of the finished good is concerned. All right. So I'll fly in the percentages. Canada has 10, Mexico has just about 1/4, and the US within North America makes up the difference, which is about 2/3, and almost evenly split Auto Alley and North Auto Alley South make up the vast majority of that. Okay. I have to spend a minute on nomenclature because when we are talking about the transformation of this industry, we have to be very clear about what is what. So on this schematic, from left to right, on the left-hand side is a schematic of a vehicle that is powered by an internal combustion engine and uses either diesel or gasoline fuel. That is the way it's been for many years. That's the default. And we're moving around the world. The industry is moving towards producing more vehicles that are powered exclusively by electricity. And that's shown on the right. And the acronym is a battery electric vehicle. And then there are intermediate cases, that is to say, what we call hybrids, and there are two types of hybrids we distinguish, and this is not our nomenclature, this is standard nomenclature. It's just not everybody uses it the same way. That's why I want to spend a minute walking you through this. And those are the hybrids. So HEVs and PHEVs are two versions of hybrids. The P stands for plug. So a plug-in hybrid has a plug. You can charge the battery directly from an outlet. The HEV does not have a plug, but both of them feature a duality of powertrains. Both of them feature an internal combustion engine as well as a battery. The battery is not as large as the battery in a pure electric vehicle, a BEV, but it is larger than the starter battery in an ICE vehicle. Okay, so from left to right, the pure internal combustion engine vehicles and the two types of hybrids, all three of them feature internal combustion engines. That's important later. The only type of vehicle in the schematic that runs on electricity exclusively is the BEV. All right, and that's often what's referred to as the endpoint or the target of this transformation. But that's what a focus in the public debate is all about. But there's a lot of other moving pieces here as well. So just a few more numbers. Today, the ICE component is the vast majority, and if you add the hybrids, north of 90% of vehicles that were produced in North America in 2023 included an internal combustion engine. So still the very, very dominant technology. And then I want to move on to show you more maps. Here we show you just from the schematic with the four types of vehicles, we show you the two on the left, ICE and HEV. They make up the vast majority of what was produced. And, we introduced two different colors here, but the basic map is the same as the map that I showed you in black and white about the entire industry footprint. The only difference is the Tesla map drops off in the Bay Area because they make only electric vehicles. It'll come back in the next map. We distinguish here car makers by where their global headquarters are. Are they headquartered in North America or are they headquartered elsewhere in the world? Just to add a little more information, but it doesn't change the story about the underlying footprint. And then you can ask, okay, so let me go back up here. These are the locations of the vehicles that are being produced. I told you that every ICE vehicle and every HEV needs an internal combustion engine. So I want to spend another minute on a map to show you where the engine plants are that supply these assembly plants with engines. The ones that are located in North America, that is. Some engines are being imported. And so now I have two colors on the map, but they actually refer to two different objects. Blue now shows the plant locations of where any kind of vehicle that has an engine. So there's now ICE, HEV, and plug-in hybrids, PHEVs. They're shown in blue. And the black color now represents the plants where the engines are produced. And first impression, the dots of the two different colors are very closely located to one another, And that's the message of the map. Engine and vehicle production are tethered pretty closely together. If you look a little more, you have to look a little harder, and then you see another point. There actually are fewer engine plants on this map than there are light vehicle assembly plants. And it's not because we dropped something off. It's because an underlying feature, the economies of scale of engine production are on average twice as large as the economies of scales of vehicle production. So therefore, there's just about half. You need only about half the number of plants to produce all the engines as you need to feed all the plants that produce your vehicles. And that also means you draw these maps on the same scale, then the engine plant circles are on balance larger because they make higher volumes of engines. Okay, spatial agglomeration. That's what this industry is known for. So let's take a look in 2023. What did the other part of the industry look like? The ones that produced BEVs in this map and the plug-in. So the electric side, the ones electric only and the ones with a relatively large battery and still a small internal combustion engine. So the first thing you notice is, excuse me, the size of the dot's much smaller. Yes, that's drawn to the same scale as the symmetrical map I showed you just a minute ago. The reason these circles are so much smaller is because the volume is just kicking in, right? This is the early days. The largest circle is the Tesla plant in California. But early indication is that the footprint of the existing sort of the legacy industry is not really thrown out the window. Okay. Okay. Now, before I hand it over to Jim, I'm gonna go back here and I want to just introduce reintroduce the question he's addressing. So I just tried to explain to you, show you a baseline, a visual on the baseline of where this industry is at. So now we can get into this question: what do we think is changing due to this increasing electrification? And the way we structure the rest of the presentation is we ask two questions that are related, symmetrically related to one another, but they look in opposite directions in terms of the time arrow. Jim is asking the question, what do we know about what has already happened in the last 8 or 9 years? How many factors respond to the declining volumes of vehicle that feature internal combustion engines? That's next. And when Jim is done, I come back and I ask the opposite question. What do we think is going to happen going forward as the volume of electric vehicles production is growing? All right, I am going to stop sharing and let Jim take it over.
Let's let Mel do an introduction really quick. Mel, you're on mute.
Okay. James Rubenstein is a professor emeritus of geography at Miami University in Ohio. He is author or co-author of 9 books, including 4 on the geography of the auto industry, as well as more than 50 articles and book chapters. Mr. Rubenstein is a consultant at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, where he has co-authored a book and 30 articles and book chapters on the auto industry with Thomas Klier. Please present James Rubenstein now.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. As you heard from Mel, I'm actually trained as I'm actually trained as a city planner, but ended up in geography and more and more involved. My degree had 1/3 economics in it, so not 100%. Here's the part 2 here. What we're looking backwards here now over the last decade. What we, of course, like so many people studying the economics of the auto industry, we've been focusing, looking ahead on the changes and the transformations related to the electrification. Well, I'm sure you're all familiar. You end up with this massive database that comes in Excel. You then sort it out by meaningful subsets, and you focus on some of it and you don't focus on some of the other. And so we had sort of been ignoring the gas engine side of things because we've been focusing on what's happening with electrification. Well, we sort of had one of those light bulb moments when we were collaborating a few months ago, sitting in Thomas's office, and we realized that there was something interesting going on with the gas engines. And what's interesting is that it's not in response to the current turmoil related to the change in administration. It's something that it turned out that car makers have been doing, pretty much all of them, over the last decade with rather little publicity compared to the headlines related to electrification. So here's what's been happening with the decline in the assembly of vehicles with engines. And you can see that there has been a decline in the in the vehicles with engines being manufactured in the United States and Canada, there's actually been an increase in the last decade of vehicles with engines in them coming out of Mexico, a little bit of an increase there. And there's only this rather small decline in the production of engines in the three countries. And look, in this case, you can see, for example, that Canada is actually producing more engines now than they were a decade ago. And how often is one ever able to say that economic data are showing that something is getting better in Canada? Okay, a lot of data on here. As Thomas has introduced, the reason that there is a relatively modest decline in engine production is you can see that in North America, we've gone from virtually none to 2.5 million hybrid vehicles. So these are things like the Prius, for example, Honda and Toyota have quite a large number of these types of vehicles. The reason that we have this awkward wording goes back, actually, Toyota kind of commandeered the term hybrid when the Prius was introduced 20 some years ago, and they called it a hybrid. And so we're kind of stuck with that terminology straight through. As a result, we have a relatively modest decline in the total number of vehicles with engines in them. You can see this increase in all three countries in these hybrid productions. Well, however, given that there is this substantial decline in the number of vehicles with engines, even with this footnote we've just given you, well, logically, wouldn't that tell us that there should be fewer plants assembling vehicles with engines? And the answer is no. There's basically no change here. Despite that, however you want to measure it, 15, 19, 30%, whatever decline in the vehicles here in North America with engines in them, there's been no change in the factories, in the number of assembly plants. And there's been basically no change in the number of plants producing the engines, gas engines, that are going into the cars. So what is going on here? Where this, in first glance, seemed to be rather a puzzle. Why hasn't there been a lot of closure here? Well, part of it is the car makers are substituting North American engines for imported engines. You can see that we've had a sharp decline in the number of engines that are crossing the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans from Germany or from Japan and Korea. And so there is this relatively modest change in the engine production in North America because there's a substitution going on here of a lot fewer imported engines coming in, the overseas engines. Okay. Neither Thomas nor I know, I'm suspecting the other 24 of you folks on here today are engineers. The Standard & Poor's, our data source here, is distinguishing 5 different kind of characteristics that are in engine production. And that's why the data has gotten, it's pretty wonky here for us. And so we're finding a really nice some gems here in this deep dive into wonkiness. We distinguish well, Standard & Poor's, the S&P Global Insight data, are distinguishing 5 types of engine features. For cylinders, we all know what that is. The engine displacement, I think pretty much people recognize that, the liters, whether is it a 2.5 liter engine or so forth. whether it's a V8, a V-shaped, or whether the cylinders are running in a line there, the number of valves that are operating in the engine to open and close, the pistons in order, the intake and so on of a four-stroke engine, and then the camshafts, the shafts that connect the pistons onto the rest of the engine, rest of the propulsion system. They tend to be in three different types. And so here is an example of our most popular engine configuration in 2023, a four-cylinder, a 2.0 liter engine, inline, 16 valves, dual overhead camshaft. Okay. Here's what's interesting then about all that. Look at the middle. The number of those unique models, totaling up those 5 characteristics, the number of unique of these models, that is sorting out these 5 features, has halved in a decade. The leaders, I guess what can I say is most familiar to people is has declined substantially, as have the number that comprise, we figured, well, say 90% of all sourcing going on here. What's in the middle here, going from 60 to 35 different unique models, a dramatic simplification of the variety. What this means is that when a consumer goes into the car dealer to buy a car, the number of different configurations is basically half of what it was a decade ago. Now, in some cases, that's not relevant. I don't know any consumer who cares whether it's a dual overhead, single overhead, or valve overhead camshafts configuration, but those have been simplified over the last decade. What this means then is that the linkages, the geographic linkages now between assembly plants and the engine plants has also been dramatically simplified in concert with simplifying or cutting in half the number of different engine models there. A decade ago, this is saying that this is the number of plants that an engine plant is shipping to. A decade ago, only 6 of these 36 engine plants in North America, only 6 of them were shipping to just one assembly plant. You can see then that most of them then were shipping here, a dozen of them, a third of them were shipping to at least 6 assembly plants across North America. And now you can see the numbers here have declined, and that we've doubled the number of engine plants that are shipping to just one assembly plant. It goes the other direction as well. The 0, these are assembly plants that have all of their engines from overseas, from Germany, basically. But you can see again a doubling, or now half, instead of a fourth. Here, a fourth of the assembly plants got all their engines from just one source. Now half of them get all of their engines from just one source. This relates to both the domestic and the international. Thomas noted earlier on one of the maps that we were distinguishing between domestic and international. We used to call these the big 3 when it was GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Chrysler has, of course, been through many changes and is now a division within Stellantis. Stellantis is basically dominated by the French, owning the Italian industry as well as the old Chrysler, mostly French executives at the top, and they are incorporated in Amsterdam. So we still call the Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, those historic pieces of Detroit, we still are classifying them as a Detroit 3, along with Ford and GM. And again, the number of the number of engine plants going to assembly plants has been declining. The number of engine plants being received into assembly plants is declining. So in other words, it depends which way, either way that you look at the linkage there, there's less, fewer engine plants linking into fewer assembly plants. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just been a wee bit of interest coming out of Washington in the last couple of weeks about tariffs. So look at this. We've seen a decline in the share of plants that are receiving the engines from the same country. In all cases, you see, and particularly a rather dramatic increase in the case of Canada, in the share of engines that are not crossing a border, okay? Now, again, this data is based on comparing the last decade. So all the car makers, without exception, have been simplifying and reducing their border crossings long before the recent election and the current policy pronouncements have been coming out of Washington, right? For the last decade, they have been cutting back on border crossings of their engines, everyone. And this is it doing it the other direction. In other words, this is looking at it from the engine plant. The previous slide looked at it from the perspective of an assembly plant. So again, you can see that the vast majority of engines now are not crossing a border. Here it is in aggregate data. You can see again the decline in the percentage crossing a border. So on the one hand, you hear all the stories about the interlocking of the three countries coming out in terms of what the impacts of tariffs, as we've been hearing all that. Yes, pistons, cylinders, valves, cams, there's a lot of that moving across the borders and coming in from overseas, but the finished engines, fewer of them are crossing the borders. And you can see that there has been basically a 20% decline in the average distance that these engines are moving now. Let me show you, as I finish up my share of this, I picked Honda because, well, it's the most visual. It works the best visually, okay? This is not to say Honda's unique. It just looks good. And I'm rather a visually oriented person here. The red represent assembly plants. This is where Honda cars and light trucks are being assembled in Canada. 3 plants here, Western Ohio, over into Eastern Indiana here, down in Alabama, and in Mexico. The triangles are engine plants. And what you can see here a decade ago, you see all these blue lines connecting engine plants to assembly plants. So what you can see here is all sorts of movement of engines a decade ago from the engine plant in Canada down to America, the engine plant in America to Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. Look also, for example, here's the engine plant in Canada, which is next door to the assembly plant in Canada. Notice there's no blue arrow. A decade ago, Honda shipped 0 engines from their engine plant in Alliston next door to their assembly plant in the same town. And virtually none down here in Mexico, very few. All right, here's the map now. Look at how it's changed. 100.0% of Honda engines are going to the cluster next door there. From the Alliston engine plant over to the Alliston assembly plant, similarly here and here, and from their Anna, Ohio engine plant to their 3 assembly plants here, that are clustered here in Western Ohio and Eastern Indiana. The number of engines that crossed one of the borders last year for Honda is 0. So, okay, I'm very visual, right? Look at how simplified Honda is. We could do this for GM, Toyota, et cetera, but it just looks particularly good here. Okay. A decline in the production of engines, a much more decline, a higher decline in the configurations, the types. We have fewer imports crossing the oceans. We have fewer engines crossing borders within North America. We have shorter distances between the engine plants and the assembly plants. That's it for my share. And stop sharing. And back to Thomas.
Okay. And then, where am I? I'm gonna make this window bigger. Hold on. Sorry, Mal, you had a question? Oops, you're muted. You're still muted.
Mel, you're muted.
I put down on mute. Do you hear me now?
Now we can,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, okay. Was President Trump trying to increase global warming and fossil fuels and trying to put a stop to electric vehicles? Is that going to have an effect on the production of the production and the buying of electric vehicles?
Are you, if you're asking about the last decade before he came into office, that's me. If you're asking about forecasts, that's Thomas.
Yeah, forecast.
So I'm gonna give you a half answer now, and I'm gonna give the other half of the answer when I'm done with the rest of the deck. So it's a definite maybe. We don't know. Forecasts, can change based on many factors. And policies do have an impact on what companies and consumers are going to do in the market space. So, so let me take that question from Mel and see where I can go with this in the Outlook panel here, the Outlook part of the presentation. Can you see the slides?
Yes, but you haven't zoomed yet. You haven't screen shared yet.
It says here I am sharing.
You just need to put it in presentation mode.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
Custom slideshow, or down at the bottom right, you should have the. There you go.
There we go. We're good now, right? Okay. So now we're looking at the forecast.
There is another question, Thomas,
Oh,
in the chat.
sorry. Yeah. Might as well go there.
Is that what caused the car makers to have to ship production engines long distances in 2016?
Because they were offering an ever greater variety of engine configurations. In some cases, they were bringing them in, for example, smaller liters from their plants in Germany or in Asia. The German car makers in particular were quite slow in ramping up to try and build engines in North America. But they basically were not paying a whole lot of attention to that. In other words, if an assembly plant in Alabama needed 2.5 liter engines, well, they're just going to source them from wherever in the world it made sense to source them from.
All right. That's okay, good. Then I'll move forward here. Go back to this. All right. So for the last part of the presentation, we're going to use a forecast. So that's a material change in the data. And the reason we do this is because that'll give us a better handle on what we expect the impact on the industry geography going to be. And I'm going to talk to you mostly through showing you maps about three elements of the industry. Not surprisingly, vehicle assembly plants will appear again, engine plants will appear again, and then for the first time, we'll show you a map or two that feature battery cell and battery pack plants. The forecasts come from the same source as our data, that's S&P Global. And I need to say a word about, how this works. So they issue a forecast monthly, and we've pulled this data not yesterday. We didn't pull it a month ago. We pulled it over it's almost 12 months ago. So the forecast itself, and that sort of partly goes to Mel's question. Forecasts change all the time. Even if he would show you the forecast that was the most recent one, that could change again a month later. The reason we're going to run with these numbers here will be hopefully convincing you we found some pattern in the data on how manufacturers respond to producing sort of this larger variety of vehicles that makes our finding rather robust and not depend on the specific numbers in the forecast. So, hold that thought, and then hopefully I can convince you of that. So just to show you about this particular forecast, how dramatic the changes are expected going to be, right? This is the production side, that's the sales side. North America, ICE drops down to a third from north of 2/3. Vehicles with engines, which is ICE, HEV, and PHEV together, are just above 50%, just about half of the industry production total of light vehicles, whereas in 2023, they were north of 90%. And purely battery electric vehicles make up 45% of light vehicle production. Again, that's one specific monthly forecast of the future. And we took it all the way to 2029, which was the end of the forecast horizon. That gives us the furthest out way of looking at the medium term footprint for this industry. So we take this data, here we break down, where do these vehicles be going to be produced relative to what happened in 2023. Canada and Mexico are growing their share of electric cars, and Mexico is growing the share of the ICE cars, the internal combustion engine driven vehicles, by the end of 2029. The question we're really interested in, okay, so you have a radical, a dramatic, a massive change in the mix of vehicles distinguishing the propulsion system. And as I showed you earlier on in the presentation, these four types of vehicles, massive shift. How is the industry going to handle this? Well, the first question is, let's look at the footprint. Let's look at where the light vehicle assembly plants are going to be in 2029 versus where they were in 2023. And when you compare those two maps here, go from the left to the right, let your eyeballs move a little bit, you're not going to see a lot of change. I mean, there's some change, some circles grow in size, some circles shrink in size, but the footprint is not changing materially. And also know that it's the same scale. The largest circle in either map represents 500,000 units. So there's hardly any change. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into that. Okay, so now we're following individual plants and we're tracing them out. Only one. So, okay, let's take another step back. So one way this could play out is we could think, well, car makers are just going to build a whole bunch of new plants that are specialized and dedicated to making electric vehicles only and nothing else. Then you'd see a whole bunch of plant construction and you see a whole bunch of plant closures. We don't see that. Okay, so let me walk you through this map and then solve the riddle, solve the puzzle in the next two slides. Plants that are filled in solid colors are continuing plants that were around in 2023. They're expected to be around in 2029. The reason they have one of the two colors is they either grow their volume, then they're green, or they shrink their volume, then they're red. If it's an X, a red X, you have to look hard to find that there's one there, and it's near central Mexico, a little bit north. That is one plant that is already closed. There's a joint venture operation between Mercedes and Nissan. And that's the only plant that is expected to close in terms of light vehicle assembly plants in North America by the end of 2029. And then there's a half a dozen plants that are going to open by the end of 2029. These are the green circles that are hollowed out in the middle. 5 of them are in the US, one's in Mexico. There's a big circle, a hollow circle in Mexico. That is Tesla plans to open a light vehicle assembly plant there. And then the 5 in the United States. There's 2 in the state of Georgia. One's the second Rivian plant, the Illinois-based all-electric vehicle producer, and the other one is a plant specialized for production of EVs by Kia Hyundai. South Carolina is VW. Then we have Tennessee. I think that's Ford. The all-electric pickup plant that there's on construction there. And then Ohio, and then a former GM plant that's sitting empty that Fisker has plans to produce vehicles there. Okay, so that's the picture. Not much change in terms of where the plants are that make these vehicles. Yet a dramatic change in the mix of the vehicles. So that seems strange. How can we explain this? The answer is the industry is addressing this changeover, not by changing out plants, by building new ones. Rather, they are addressing it by keeping the existing plants and reconfiguring existing light vehicle assembly plants so they can produce a larger variety of vehicle types. And variety here is defined in the 4 categories that I showed you early on, going all the way from purely gasoline-driven vehicles to purely electric vehicles. So there are 4 different options. I should note as a small footnote, in 2029, there's a very small number of vehicles expected to be produced that are powered by fuel cells. The number is so low, it didn't really change anything, so we dropped them right off the bat here. So the option you have as vehicle manufacturer, you can produce only, you have a specialized assembly plant that produces vehicles only of one propulsion type, or you can have all 4 of them in your plant. And by 2029, there are actually 4 of the assembly plants that are arranged in such a flexible fashion that they can do all 4 together. The big change here is a slight drop from the plants that are totally specialized from 38 to 33, but then you look at the pair of bars on the horizontal axis where it says 3, so they can make 3 of the 4 types in one plant. That essentially doubles from 11 to 21. So that's the answer. The industry is dealing with this massive changeover by making their light vehicle assembly plants more flexible in the dimension of propulsion systems. One interesting footnote to this, when you look at the totally specialized plants, the first pair of bars, where we have 38 in 2023, and then the orange color represents 2029, going down to 33. The vast majority of those 38 plants in 2023 are specialized in making ICE vehicles, 30 of them. There's 8 already that make BEVs only. In 2029, that is expected to flip upside down. There will be 20, they're expected to be 23 light vehicle assembly plants that make only battery electric vehicles. And the balance is 10. 9 of them are still making only ICE vehicles, and there's 1 that's expected to be fully specialized in producing hybrid vehicles. So now we have the answer of the puzzle to how the industry is expected to accommodate that massive shift in propulsion mix. And that also answers then how we see basically no change in the footprint. This is going to be important because it's going to drive the rest of our conclusions about the outlook piece. So now I'm going back to comparing the ICE and HEV side of the industry to the BEV and PHEV side of the industry, like I did early on when I set the baseline. Except here, I show you the maps for 2029. Again, it's a little confusing because we have red and blue colors, but if you sort of squint a little bit so you don't focus on the colors, focus on where the dots are located, the footprint of this industry is not materially changing by 2029 because the flexibility of the individual, let me go back up again, of the individual assembly plants, that's where the change occurs. They're not relocating plants, not materially, just a small number. 1 closure, 6 opening. Relative to 80, that's not much, right? And then when you go look and check sort of the relative distribution of production across light vehicle assembly plants by the 4 different types, of course the numbers are going to change, but the average production in the average production in a light vehicle assembly plant is not changing much. It changes from 211,000 to 204,000, but the propulsion system that has the majority in 2029 will be all electric cars, again according to this one forecast that we're looking at. So next, we're replicating the exercise we did for the baseline in 2023, also for 2029, and we asked the question, what do we expect the change in propulsion systems, does this impact at all the location of engine plants? And you already know what the answer is going to be, because when we start with the finding that the footprint of light vehicle assembly is not changing, why would the footprint of engine plants change? Jim has already showed you this in tabular form. Yeah, I'll show you this in the map. Again, the volumes, the engine production volumes at specific plants is changing. To the size of the orange circles are changing, but there is hardly any closure. And the underlying logic for keeping engine plants relatively close to your light vehicle assembly plants is also not going away. So another aspect where we find relatively little change. And that brings us to the final element that we want to look at. We, of course, want to look at, oh, wait a minute, do I have this in tabular form? Yeah, all right, that's fine. So this just shows you the underlying units, 14.5 million to 9.1 million decline of vehicles with engines. So it's not trivial, but no material impact on the footprint of the industry. And engine sourcing, that sort of doubles up a bit with what Jim showed you, except now we're going forward looking from 23 to 29, not a material change there as well in terms of the distribution. The units are going down, distribution is not changing of where these engines are being produced. Okay, and now for the final pieces, now we also want to look at the thing that's growing, the object that's growing in this industry, and that's how do you power an electric car? You need batteries, and batteries are comprised of cells, and once you have put all the cells together, it's the battery pack. The functional equivalent of an internal combustion engine is a relatively large battery pack that gets embedded in the vehicle as it moves along the assembly line. So we look at those 2 pieces. We look at production of battery cells and production of battery packs in 2029. Again, going back to the S&P forecast, and here is what we find. A minute first on explaining the colors. Battery pack plant is in blue, battery cell plant is in orange. The pack is sort of the heavy object. That's when all the cells have been configured and put together in one relatively large container that's nowadays often actually constitutes the floor of the vehicle. So it could be a big rectangle, it could be a big T-shaped object. The battery cell plants and the battery pack plants are closely located to one another. Interestingly enough, the economies of scale of battery production seems to resemble that of engine production. It's noticeably larger than the economies of scale of vehicle production. So you need just about the same number of battery plants as you need the same number of engine plants. Cell and pack plants locate close to one another, and the pack plants are actually often very closely located to where the vehicles are being produced for obvious reasons. The forecast has the number of plants growing dramatically. In North America, 28 cell and 28 pack plants. That is in no small part. Well, it's not. If there's a connection here to industrial policy money that went out to the Inflation Reduction Act, and on the flip side, imports of batteries this is for cells, are expected to dramatically shrink from nearly half, 46% to 10%. North America sourcing of battery cells is to take up 90% of consumption by 2029. All right, that's big. So lots of plants coming online, being constructed. And so here's where the major changes are. And that ends part 3 of our online virtual seminar today. So in wrapping up, I want to summarize the partial summaries into a comprehensive summary, just to remind you. So the first exercise was look at the footprint of this industry, and we found that it's highly agglomerated in space, has been for many, many decades. It's a phenomenon. It's a feature of this industry. We illustrated a strong co-location between engine plants and final vehicle assembly plants. And we showed the beginning of electric vehicle production that followed the existing footprint of the industry. Recent changes looking backwards, that was Jim's part. What have car makers done as internal combustion engine powered vehicle volume has dropped? They've discovered a way to substantially simplify the production of that part of vehicle type. You strip out variety of engines. That is a hugely a large cost-saving opportunity that's needed, as you have to invest a ton of resources into the growing part of the industry. And as a result of this reduction in variety of engine models offered to the consumer, car makers have been able to tighten up the supply linkages between engine plants and vehicle assembly plants, and as a sort of the related result, engines happen to be crossing fewer borders within North America as well. And then the last piece that I just presented, looking forward, we actually find remarkably little change that is expected in the footprint of the industry over the medium term. Very few plant openings as far as vehicle assembly is concerned, hardly any plant closings. And then from that follows that the engine plant locations aren't changing much going forward, as there's fewer closures than you would expect, because vehicles with engines are not falling as much as vehicles that exclusively rely on internal combustion engines. And then the battery cell and battery pack plants are falling in the same footprint of the industry. And this is all happening against the background of an expected radical change in the production mix. So essentially everything in this industry is changing but the geography. That's what it appears to be the case. Just repeating that. I got to add my talking points of the actual slides. And there we are. So this is it. And we're happy to entertain your questions.
There were 2 questions in the chat while you're finishing the sharing, and I'll just briefly address them. One will have to do with any downsides to the agglomeration. Car makers traditionally had thought, well, more is better. The consumer comes in to the showroom, and if there's even more options there, that seems that they would be more likely to make the sale. What they've been doing is stripping out slow sellers here. It just wasn't worth producing a particular configuration that only had a few thousand output a year. It just didn't make sense. There was also a question in the chat about future demand because of the different lifespan possible between electric vehicles and the gas engines. And what's happened is that the average, the mean life of cars has increased so dramatically in the last few years. We're up to, in 2024, the official number was 12.6 years is the average age, the mean age of a car, of a light vehicle in the United States. It's hard to see that number is going to go down, but it's also hard to see that it's going to go up even further. That the propulsion system probably isn't going to matter. What's driving older vehicles is pricing, the cost of new vehicles, and on the other hand, the fact that the worst car made today is better than the best car made a decade ago. So I think, yeah, those were the two Chad questions.
Jim, if I had a question about with the plugins, why are those not really taking off?
I drive one. I've been driving a Chevrolet Volt since 2012, three of them. For my lifestyle, it's perfect. I never use electricity living in a small town, and when I have to go up to Chicago, to the big city to see Thomas, then I use gasoline. But if you think about it, having a 1.4 liter engine or a 1.8 liter engine and a battery capable of going 60 miles isn't terribly efficient for a car maker. And there, however, the future on the plug-in hybrids is there's one thing that may trigger a sharp increase in those, and that is California. The California rules here that are requiring an increasing percentage of zero emission vehicles on through into the getting to 100% in the 2030s. Plug-in hybrid vehicles are included in that. Hybrid vehicles like the Prius are excluded from the California mandate. So if you're if you really want a zoom engine in your car, and you live in one of the states that are mandated through the California system, which is 40% of the country, the only way at this point that you're going to get a zoom good old-fashioned gasoline engine in the 2030s is a PHEV. So it's they're holding on to that for the future, even though sales have been relatively low. The big burst, as you've seen, increase by a couple million just in the last few years, is the HEVs. As I said, it's like the Prius and Honda and Toyota are the biggest purveyors of these gasoline cars that are helped by batteries. If you've got a Prius or a Camry hybrid, you know that you're getting battery help when you're in reverse or starting from the dead stop, which is the least efficient moment for a gasoline engine. So, but it's still, of course, you're not plugging it in, and it's not basically running on electricity in an HEV. And they are banned as of now. They will be not permitted into the 2030s in California.
Okay.